Useless Monster by Mute Crows. Chapter 24. Fur buzzing into his face was the first thing Izuku registered as he groggily woke up. He flinched slightly at this fact without changing his position all too much. If it hadn't been for his confidence in his own bodily awareness, he may have actually fallen off of the couch where he had shifted in his sleep. The next thing to really throw him for quite the loop was the sound of purring coming from the ball of fur wiggling its way into the warm pocket his body made when his legs and arms were folded just so. White and tortoiseshell fur was pushed in a bunch of different directions by said attempt, and he really didn't know what to do. He was rather nervous to move since he had a long, poorly running history with furry animals. He slowly unfolded himself and looked down as the face turned towards him and saw eyes mostly white. Only the outer edges of the iris were visible, which was a rather brilliant shack of yellow. Hello," Izuku whispered gently, lifting an unsure hand to pet the cat. He hadn't pet a cat in a very, very long time. Was the boisterous response as the cat stretched up its head to meet Izuku's second stroke halfway. His heart was racing, cautious excitement thrumming through him. A small smile spread as he scratched around the ears and he watched its eyes close happily. A door closed upstairs, followed by footsteps that felt uncharacteristically loud compared to what he was used to from Aizawa as he came down them. He didn't turn, not wanting to move and possibly make the cat move.
"I was wondering where Marble went. She was out on the balcony with me for a bit."
He reached over Izuku and ran a hand over her shoulders once.
"Have you had pets before? I didn't think to ask if she would be an issue."
No, animals usually don't like me all that much. I put them on edge, I think."
Marble lifted her chin and her ears flattened as Izuku scratched along her jaw. As he sat back more, he felt a blanket roll down his back to rest against the couch.
"So you are alright with Hizashi's cat wandering over here like she usually does, then?"
"She's not yours? I figured you would be a cat person, Aizawa-sensei."
He turned his head just a bit, not taking his eyes off of Marble as she started to rapidly knead on his stomach. He felt a little giddy from it.
"No, she just walks back and forth between our homes using the balconies. We did a lot of safety proofing for it and built a little wild-in catwalk for her so she can go whenever she likes."
He finally walked off and went into the kitchen area, returning with a drink pouch.
"I wondered what that was about when we walked up. I hadn't considered a blind—"
Knocking on the front door made Izuku actually flinch, this time from the volume alone. Marble chirped in confusion, but didn't move from where she was now lying. A key turned in the lock, and Aizawa let out a seemingly exasperated breath. It felt just as fond as last night, though, even as Izuku watched him turn to the hall. They clearly cared for each other, Aizawa and Mike. "Hey, Sho!" Mike's voice was cut off abruptly. "Hey, boys! I have deemed this a trip in desperate need of taste, and as such," Midnight leaned dramatically into view, holding the back of her hand to her brow, "I have brought my grace into your presence."
"Oh, and how did you even find out about this trip?"
Aizawa asked around the pouch he still had held to his mouth.
"That's irrelevant."
She opened an eye to look at him, still slowly descending the wall.
"And also can be talked about in the car. We were supposed to meet All Might there,"
Mike added quickly.
"Are you both ready to go?"
Izuku looked at his wrinkled uniform that was steadily gathering cat hair.
One moment."
He was careful as he moved Marble onto the seat next to him. There was underlying anxiety as he went into the room, his room, and picked up his least dirty clothing he currently had from where he had left it the night before. He wasn't sure why so many were involved, but from the sound of it, it may have not been planned to be as many people going on this particular trip. Midnight ends up being the one driving, with Mike taking the other front seat. Aizawa sat next to him in the back seat, arms crossed loosely, and one hand pulling at a particular spot on the bandages covering his face. The two in front were chattering away noisily as they went. It was sorely similar to how his friends acted at lunch. They must not have much time to actually get all together with their multiple jobs. As it would turn out, Mike had not directly invited Midnight, Kayama as she insisted he call her, since she was not out in suit. She had overheard him talking to himself about things he wanted to check out while shopping, so of course she had to go, and upon finding out that it was for Izuku, apparently, she had become beyond delighted. Aizawa just scoffed as they pulled up into the lot for the mall and got out quickly. He waited by the car as the others stepped onto the sidewalk, Mike already on his phone and typing away. Izuku hesitated in the seat. This was stupid. He has been around big crowds constantly over the years, so what difference was there now? He swallowed quietly and looked up when he heard a knock on the hood of the car.
You don't have to do this right now, you know. We can do this later, or even online if it would be more comfortable. We just figured holding cloths that you would have to wear or sleep in would be better than just looking at pictures.
Aizawa leaned down to look into the door he still had open.
No one. I'm okay.
He unclasped his seatbelt and got out of the car. The door felt too loud as he shut it. He walked up to the others, only to just now realize that Aizawa was still in his hero gear. Everyone else was in casual civilian outfits.
He's waiting for us just inside, apparently.
Mike waggled his phone at them, put it back in his pocket, then took point as they walked up to the main entrance. Izuku had been in this mall before. He looked at an alcove he had spent a rainy night in right in the main archway and tucked it away as the fuzzy memory made his heart hurt. It had been early on then. Security had not been happy to find someone tucked onto the property, and less so when it was such a small kid. He had not wanted to be taken when he was still looking for his mother and ran. Izuku grabbed onto the constant background ache of Yagi's lung the moment he caught a flash of stricken gold. He smiled a bit, his step getting a little faster as he watched him almost drop his phone. Yagi looked up and grinned at their approaching group, raising a hand to wave in response to Kayama's boisterous hailing. Izuku fell in line with him immediately. It wasn't intentional, but it was comfortable. His heart felt like it wasn't hammering as hard the moment he did.
I hope your first night was well,
Yagi asked, tone light and warm, as if this was any other meeting they would have had.
They have a cat. I haven't been able to pet a cat in years.
He looked at his hand as he spoke, as if he would be able to feel Marble's fur from here if he focused hard enough.
Yagi laughed at that. Full of refreshing experiences, then, I take it.
It was definitely different.
He was quick to follow as they began to walk.
But not bad.
Good, good. I was thinking about getting the batting first, just to get it out of the way,
Aizawa said plainly as he indirectly guided Mike into the direction of a home goods store.
Always particular about the efficiency of things, aren't they?
Kayama mock whispered to Mike, leaning into him conspiratorially.
Oh, please! As if we all don't know you are the most particular about getting things lined up just right! His efficiency is a relief next to the chaos that can cause!
He pushed her back and entered the store with a smile.
It's just convenient since we are still pretty much right at the entrance!
Gonna make the lady carry the bags back? Her hand pressed against her chest as if wounded. Where is the chivalry?
Namori, I have a casted arm, and we aren't gonna make you do it alone. Anyways, you have the keys.
Aizawa piped up from next to Izuku while they looked at different bedspreads. Izuku wasn't sure what he expected once in the store, but this many styles of twin sheets and comforters was not it.
I was figuring two to start with, so that while one is being washed, the other can be used.
Yagi had a knuckle to his chin as he considered the sheets.
The prices were glaring at Izuku,
and he was careful to pick an acceptably nice-looking one that still was one of the cheapest sets on the shelves. He held it nervously in his hands and glanced at Yagi, who took a moment to notice he had grabbed one.
My boy, don't look at the prices right now. These are something you will hopefully have of use for years.
He carefully took the package and flipped it over to look over the bag and then put it back.
It may not be something you ever were afforded the choice of, but the cheaper things in terms of things like bedding, shoes, and bags tend to wear out way faster and actually will cost you much more money in the long run. You want to look at what is in the sets as well, because some will be the same price but have half the content.
Oh!
Take your time looking for something you would like to have. This is not just for you to simply use, Midoriya. Get something that makes you feel happy or comfortable to have in your room,
Aizawa said from where he had drifted down the aisle. He turned back to the packages and stared intently. What makes me happy? He scanned the prices as he went, careful this time not to pick the absolute cheapest one. He didn't want to waste the money they were going to spend on him. He finally stopped on a package near the end cap of the aisle. When he turned it over, he saw that it listed a fitted sheet, comforter, and pillowcase. Something that meant it was essentially a full set, and the small circle punched out of the packaging to let browsers touch it felt nice enough. What makes me comfortable? He walked back and hesitantly held it out to Yagi.
The lurch he felt in his lung was grabbed immediately with a tongue.
It's what makes me comfortable,
he explained as he kept his eyes on the All Might-themed set, patterned with his mentor's hero outfit design.
Yes, of course. We will need to get a second set. It doesn't have to be the same pattern if you want a different one as well.
Yagi held the package in his arms and Izuku hurried back to the aisles. He ended up having to go to the next aisle over to find his second set. It was a simple green set, but the fabric felt familiar. He frowned as he picked it up and walked back to where Yagi was. Aizawa was there as well, a futon folded under his arm as he stood near the register.
All set?
Aizawa asked as he walked up. He nodded and set his bed set on the counter. The other two items were stacked next to it, barcode side up, and Yagi quickly handed over his card before Aizawa could even get his phone out of his pocket. He gave a sheepish grin when Aizawa eyed him pointedly while the transaction was completed.
At least let me get you one favor, Aizawa-kun,
Yagi said as they walked out of the store to see the other two heroes approaching with drinks. Aizawa just huffed at him and accepted the drink Mike was handing him.
Ouch! What happened now?
Mike asked, clearly trying to hold back laughter at the way Aizawa was pointedly drinking and looking at other shops.
Yagi-san paid for something that wasn't for me,
he explained as he accepted the warm drink and sniffed it curiously. Hot chocolate.
Thank you, Mike-sensei. Please, Yamada, when I'm not in uniform or on campus. Same deal as Nomuri, little man,
he said with a wink. He quickly took the bag from Aizawa and one of the ones from Yagi. Kayama swapped one of the drinks she was holding for the other bag Yagi had. They were back quickly from their trip to the car and already off on another topic, quick in both conversation and stride, as they led the group on to the next of, presumably, multiple shops. When the conversation came up to something about merchandise ventures, Yagi was happy to join. Izuku was more than fascinated to listen. He mostly thought of merchandise as clothing and other action figure kind of toy deals, to be honest. But it turned out there was a whole swath of things he hadn't considered. Apparently, Yamada had been trying to work on doing partnership deals with some headphone company that also had a hand in hearing aid research, something he claimed was inspired by Kayama's incredibly popular and growing new line of weighted children's plushies. They were fully customizable to have different textures, weights, and durabilities for kids with quirks that were harsher on toy life. She was talking happily about the different kirigumi outfits that the brand was about to roll out that would go over the base pajamas for kids who have specific fixations, another thing that could be custom ordered outside of the base initial rollout they had planned. They were on the third clothing store, only a few pairs having actually been selected so far, with the insistence that Izuku only grab clothing he would be comfortable wearing and not just some cheap plain clothes. He had stopped paying full attention to the conversation for a short while when Kayama got especially giddy, her little hop getting his attention back.
You actually got full custody?
Shut up! Kayama let out a loud and excited noise. Oh, now I can absolutely start bringing over more of the meals I make to crash your place with Hisashi. Can't deny the food anymore in good faith when you now have another mouth to feed that has a say-so in it. She beamed.
You can't crash my place anymore because the guest room is now Midoriya's room,
he said blandly as they wandered the clothing in various areas that were all still inside of Izuku. She scoffed and waved him off. Who said I was gonna use the guest room? You never use your main bedroom since you just sleep in the living room. Oh, but it's only logical they say boorishly. Isn't that right, Hisashi? She steamrolled through her conversation as she picked up a red sweater and held it up to herself for a moment, then set it back. Left her bubbling up when Aizawa groaned quietly at her imitation. I felt that the boorish part is a little harsh, but it is a fair point. You can also just stay in my half of the duplex instead of theirs anyway, Yamada said as he walked over with a different sweater and held it up to her.
Do you typically tease him like this?
Yagi asked with a small smile. He was looking at something in his hands and made his way over to Izuku. He handed him a shirt that simply said dress shirt in plain text across the front. Izuku had picked up a different one in a different store that had said plaid shirt, and he huffed out a small laugh as he accepted the shirt. Oh, you little Faith! We only tease him when he's in the mood for it, Yamada explained.
Hisashi definitely has a good idea about you staying in his half of the duplex, though, Nomori.
Aizawa spoke up from in front of the magazines that were near the register, already ready to go again. As they left that shop with more clothes added to their collection, the banter continued. Izuku found that it had been a while since he had even considered the bustling of the crowd. Only when he had thought of it did he register the many small aches and pains around him. He paused as the reality of not being in constant conscious awareness of every little pain around him sank in. He hadn't even thought that that was something he could simply ignore before. The unshakable presence of the pain of others was only ever gone when he was alone and away from people enough to not feel it. Yagi and Aizawa both stopped and turned to him, a question no doubt on the tip of their tongues. He just shook his head and hurried to fall back in line with them. When in another shop, Izuku was standing in front of a small gray dragon curled into a coiled pencil cup, Yagi quietly asked if he liked the item. Izuku nodded and hesitated before reaching out and taking it off the shelf. It was more expensive than the simple wire cup, but it was something he wanted. If Yagi was standing a little taller after Izuku added it to the small stack of clothing on the counter at the checkout, Izuku surely wasn't going to comment on it. He didn't comment on the way that Yamada and Kayama exchanged bright looks, and Aizawa seemed to relax just slightly, either. They were stopped at one of the many food stalls in the main plaza, the one Izuku had looked at a few times on their lap around the mall, when the televisions dotting the area that were airing the usual news and advertisements started to talk about the attack at USJ. Statements from officers and heroes who had been on the scene were being shown and discussed. Izuku accepted the food from the vendor with slightly shaking hands, attentively listening. Anxiety lancing through him as he worried over if any mention of him was going to come up.
We could leave now and finish another day, Izuku.
He looked up at Yagi as he felt his hand land on his shoulder. Please, Yagi-san. He knew his voice was shaking too. He hated that it even was. He had been fine all day, it was just the news. He had been on the news indirectly many times. A few times even directly. There wasn't any reason for this time specifically to be any different. Yagi squeezed his shoulder gently before gesturing to the others where they were waiting at a different stall that it was time to start heading out. They meandered at Izuku's pace back towards the entrance, continuing to let him set the pace even though he wasn't in front. Wait! He stopped as he thought of something he desperately needed to grab. Hun, we can go somewhere else for a last-minute grab if you don't want to be here anymore, Kayama said, the smile on her face kind and understanding in a well-practiced manner. I need picture frames, he explained. He saw the way Yagi's expression became somber for a moment before it changed to something more determined. Easily something we can get at a smaller shop, Yamada added in. Please, I just need two. Are you sure?
There were some frames in that first home goods shop we were in. They had simple frames in the window. We can grab them as we leave, Yagi said, voice confident, as he spoke over Yamada's question.
Izuku sat in the car seat, gingerly running his fingers over the plain dark brown wooden frames in his hands. There had been questions on if he was confident on their size, but when he said he was sure, Yagi was quick to accept and quicker to purchase the frames. They all had agreed in the parking lot to meet the next morning for breakfast before going out to get the last bit of shopping done, mostly just basic decorative desires he may have, and any more clothing he may find that he liked. Yagi waved them off as they left and told Izuku that if he was needed, that both Yamada and Aizawa had his number to contact. The next morning went much faster than the day before, but was just as comfortable after the first two shops. He wasn't really present the whole time, but no one made any fuss over it. They allowed him to drift and look through items under their collective watch. It was like he was floating in a pool, instead of the usual ocean of thoughts trying to batter away at him. It was different. That night, as Izuku sat across from Aizawa, freshly unbound from his bandages but still in a cast, he dug up the nerve to ask what he wanted, the remains of their dinner sitting between them. Do you know anyone who can restore physical photographs? Izuku fiddled with the sleeve of the thin jacket he had gotten, the thumb holes providing an unexpected amount of comforting pressure on his palms.
It would depend on how severe the damage is, but yes, I do know people who can restore physical photos.
He was looking at a book he had set on the table, but clearly had shifted his focus to Izuku himself. He quickly got up and went into his room, a fumbled request to be excused barely getting out of his mouth as he rushed. He gently grabbed the two images and padded back out to stand next to him. He hesitated momentarily, long enough that Aizawa closed his book and turned to face him, then carefully held out the photos. Aizawa took them from him with barely a ghost of a touch. He didn't say anything about the char and heat discoloration, just carefully looked them over.
I will bring them to the best person I know, though I will have to take them for a few days for them to be restored.
Izuku tensed at that. Days? He didn't know it would take days. He had never been away from these pictures for more than a few hours if he could help it. How would he know if something happened to them? They were all that he had left of her to still look.
I will make sure they stay completely safe. If they end up doing scans to fix them, I will ensure that you get the originals back along with the restored copies.
Aizawa kept them held in such a manner that Izuku had the choice to take them back. Before he could get too far into his own head, he nodded. Okay. Aizawa carefully got up, not even jostling them as he stood without using either arm, and walked into the kitchen. There was a clattering of stuff, and then he was returning with a tin that was just a little bigger than the photos and set the tin on the table.
They will be in this until I can get them to the restoration artist. It is moisture-proof and also will help keep marble from hopping up onto them. I should be able to have them in the artist's hands tomorrow, but I will let you know if it'll be another day until they have them.
Thank you, Aizawa-sensei. Temporary end of Useless Monster by Mute Crows. The author has since put the story on hiatus, so whether or not it is continued is up to the discretion of the author. But until they do, thank you for listening.